All right, excellent. So I will try to keep an eye on the chat periodically, but if you have any questions, I will definitely have some time at the end to cover those. So feel free to drop those in the chat as well. But let's go ahead and get started. Looks like everyone can see my slides and likes the background. So awesome. Thanks Unsplash for that, and slides.com. So yeah, so like Sierra said, oops, sorry about that. Let's see, I gotta share this way. Okay, so like Sierra said, I am Cecelia Martinez. I am a success engineer at Cypress.io, located in Atlanta, Georgia. So Cypress is a testing framework for anything that runs in a browser. But today I'm going to be talking about Nuxt. So as Sierra said, I am a track evangelist for Women Who Code Front End, and also on the Out in Tech leadership team. So Out in Tech is for the LGBTQIA+ community in tech. Additionally, you can find me at Cecelia Creates on Twitter and GitHub. I have shared the repository and the slides, so feel free to follow along if you like during this talk. So the repository is just here on GitHub, and it essentially is the project that we're going to be taking a look at today, as well as an outline of some of the different features of Nuxt and the content module. And then, like I said, the slides, it's just cypress.slides.com/Cecelia/unpacking the Nuxt content module if you'd like to follow along or reference these in the future. Okay, so let's get started. What is Nuxt? Nuxt is an open source Vue framework. So it is a framework on top of a framework, or a frameworkception kind of thing. But if you've used Gatsby, is probably the most similar type of framework that I've used to the Nuxt content module specifically. But it provides additional features and scaffolding and functionality out of the box that you can use to leverage on top of Vue. So it leverages modules for added functionality. So if you've used Gatsby, they use the concept of plugins. Similar here, except Nuxt uses modules. So the Nuxt content module is an example of one of those modules that you can leverage to add functionality to the default kind of Nuxt application. There's automatic performance optimization built in with Nuxt. It's a great developer experience, I have to say. I am still relatively new to Vue, and I think that coming from Gatsby and React, Nuxt was able to let me get up and running very quickly in building this site. And so I have to commend them for their developer experience and their great documentation. Additionally, it allows you to really easily do static site generation, and it's also very popular for server-side rendering as well. So some of the features that we leverage in the application specifically that we're going to be taking a look at today, the first is automatic component imports. So with Nuxt, any component inside of your components directory will be automatically imported to any page or even other components within your application. So if you are used to Vue and you're used to having to import every single component in your script tag, there's no need to do that anymore. So if you have used other types of component libraries where you had to add in every single V button or anything like that, that's not required with Nuxt. So all of your components are automatically imported, and you can just leverage them right in the template within your Vue file. Additionally, we're talking about automatic routing. So like I said, Nuxt handles routing for you out of the box. All you have to do is set this up in your pages directory, which we will take a look at in this presentation. One of the things that I like about it is that it has vuetify component library support. So it has a vuetify module that we'll be leveraging to add support for vuetify. If you've never used vuetify, it's a component library very similar to like Bootstrap that allows you to kind of just leverage existing components and functionality without having to design it yourself too much. And so the Nuxt content module specifically, as I mentioned, Nuxt uses modules to add functionality. So this is something that we're adding to a default Nuxt application in order to leverage the functionality for specifically building a content-heavy site, like a blog, anything where you have a lot of different pages that will have typically the same template or format, but the content will change. So the Nuxt content module allows you to fetch content and dynamically create pages with a content API. So this is an API that provides a number of different functions that allow you to query for, fetch, and interact essentially with content stored in your application. The content can be in a number of different file types. It can be markdown, CSV, YAML, JSON, XML. We will be using for our application markdown, and then we will also use the YAML front matter block to be able to define the metadata that we'll need to access when we create our pages. Additionally, we'll be talking about using default and custom injected variables. So as I just mentioned, we're using a YAML front matter block in order to kind of create metadata for our posts, for our content. And we can leverage this on our pages in order to display that data in a way that's helpful and provides context for the user. There's also a really neat feature where you can live edit your content in a dev environment. So if you are running the application locally and testing how it looks on the page, and you notice that there's something wrong with the content and you want to update it, you can actually just double click on it and it'll update and save the changes locally, right directly to the file, which is really great. And I'll demonstrate that later as well. And like I said before, there's easy static site generation with the Nuxt generate command. So that's what we'll be using here. So the way that that works is essentially all of our content is set up, all of our assets and everything are together. Nuxt generate will build that site for you, publish it in a dist directory, which can then be deployed really easily. And I'll be talking about how I use Netlify to deploy this site specifically. All right, so let's talk about our application. So this is essentially, it's a redesign of my personal blog portfolio site. It has multiple content categories. So we're leveraging the content module 3 different times, essentially, with a very similar format. But on our application, we have projects, a blog, and we also have talks, which is essentially a recording of all the different talks that I've done. So we will have 3 different directories within our content folder in order to break these up. We also have a responsive menu for small viewports. This is leveraging components with and the automatic responsive layout. Both of these are leveraging vuetify to be able to develop the navigation, the layout, cards, icons, and image components. So let's take a look at the application. So this is the deployed version on Netlify. As you can see, it's pretty standard, straightforward kind of personal site with some social icons. As I mentioned, it is responsive. So in the large view, they have all the buttons on top for projects, blog, and talks. But in the mobile view, we instead have a menu that pops out and is responsive. And you can see the content kind of collapses on top of itself. And then if we go to our projects page, everything is kind of responsive that way as well. And again, this was very easy to set up out of the box with vuetify components. So if we kind of go back, we can see, like I said, we have our projects, blog, and talks. And as you'll see, the format of these is very similar across all 3. And all of these are being dynamically generated with the content module. All right, so how can we do this with an application? Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the technical aspects. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about getting started. First things first is going to be the installation. So if you're creating a brand new project and you want to get started with the content module right away, you can use create Nuxt app, and then you can select the content module on setup. So whether you're using Yarn or NPX, whenever you use create Nuxt app, essentially it presents, it's interactive in your terminal. It presents you with a number of different options. You can add certain components, and you can add like different types of configurations, or you can add vuetify at that time too. So essentially you would just select the content module on setup in order to make sure that gets added into your application. Or if you already have an existing Nuxt project and you want to add it to an existing project, you just add the module with either yarn add or npm install, and it's at nuxt/content. So once you install that, it'll essentially create some of the scaffolding that you need to be able to leverage the functionality. The other thing that you'll want to do is in your nuxt.config.js. So that is your, probably self-explanatory, but that's your Nuxt configuration file. You will want to include Nuxt/content within your modules option. So within the entire body, there's going to be a modules option in your configuration. And you want to make sure that Nuxt/content is in there so that it builds properly. Like I mentioned before, we're using vuetify. So this project uses the Nuxt vuetify module. There's a couple different ways that you could add vuetify to your project, and this was what I found was the easiest way to just get it set up to where I was able to use it right out of the box. So you can follow the setup instructions at the module repo. So this is the link here to the module repository, and there's some setup instructions. Very straightforward though, and we have the module as a dependency in our package.json, as we can see here. And then additionally, within our build modules, so we had our modules where we added the Nuxt Content module, but within our build modules, this is where we would add the Nuxt.js vuetify, because that's when it's going to be taking place during the build. So the nice thing is that we can now use vuetify.js components in our application. And just like with our custom components, there's no need to import them. So I recently did an application using Vue and Ionic, and that, you have to import every single Ionic component. With this, with vuetify, everything just works out of the box magically. You can just start using them right away in your code. Highly recommend getting it set up this way in order to be able to leverage that as easily as possible. All right, so our components for our application, we don't have too many. We have a homepage, which is the index page that shows the image and the social icons. We have our header component. We have our content index page. So what this means is this is the page that shows the list of all the talks, all the blog posts, and all the projects. And then we also have a content post page. So this is going to be a slug page that serves as the template for all of those individual posts. In order to set this up, we leverage the content directory within our project folder. So we can use the content directory to manage the content for our site. And from here, the content module will create dynamically our content pages. So in our project specifically, like I mentioned, we have 3 different types of content. We have articles, projects, and talks. You can use different file types. And like I said before, we're using Markdown in this project. So within our content directory, we can use subdirectories to organize the contents by type. The content and articles directory contains the Markdown files for each blog post. So each blog post is written in Markdown. And then at the top, it has a YAML front matter block that contains the metadata that we will need to basically use those to inject the variables into our page templates. So in this case, we have a sample with the title, a description, our image, the alt text for our image, and then tags if we wanted to be able to sort by our view tags in a future version of this application. So what happens is once we have our content, we need to think about our routes. So Nuxt handles page routing for you out of the box. All you have to do is everything that's within your pages directory will automatically generate a route based on that file name. So in our pages directory in our project, we have the blog directory, the projects directory, and the talks directory, as well as an index.vue. And as you can see in our application, this is essentially our index.vue. We have our blog, and this route is created automatically for us. Don't have to do anything about it. Projects, and then talks. So all of these routes are built because there is an index.vue within those directories. I love Ionic too. Yeah, and so as you can see, again, we're on the application and those get dynamically generated. So when we want to link to routes in our application, when linking to a page internally, we're going to use the Nuxt linked component. So we'll just use a to, and then we'll pass the route. So in this case, this is from our navigation component. We have a Nuxt link to our homepage, and we have a Nuxt link here to our projects page. And again, we're just using that to option, and we're passing through the slug. And that'll automatically get handled for us whenever we're linking internally. You will want to use a regular anchor tag, for anything external. All right, so we talked about the routing and we talked about the content. So let's talk about how our pages actually get generated. So to leverage dynamic page creation for our content, we need to create an index.vue and an _slug.vue file for each subdirectory in our pages folder. So the index.vue page, again, contains a list of all of the articles in our content. So that's going to be these pages here. Again, our talks page shows all the talks that come from our markdown files. Our blog is going to show all the blog posts coming from markdown, and the projects are showing all the projects coming from our projects markdown files. The slug.vue serves as the template for each individual article. So if we go into an individual article, we can see that it creates this slug based on the file type. And we can see that this all of this aspect of it is coming from that component, that underscore slug.vue, to generate the pages. So in order to get the information that we need from our content directory, we're going to leverage the content API. So we can see here, this is in the script tag inside of our index.vue component under our blog directory. And we can see here this function starting on line 4. Well, this kind of code here. Essentially, articles is awaiting the use of the content API. We're passing through the name of the directory that we want to search, which in our case was called articles. And we're passing through the slug of the URL that we're visiting. Then we're going to grab the title, description, image, and slug for each article. We're going to sort them by when they were created, and then we're going to fetch them, and we're going to go ahead and return those articles. Again, from the individual pages, we want to grab the entire article, including the content. So we're just searching the articles directory for the slug of the URL that we're visiting, and we're fetching the entire thing this time, and we're returning the article. We can then use it inside of our template. So in this case, this is the properties coming from the YAML front matter, and then it's also what we grabbed in that content API function. So we can leverage these within our template, where we have here a Nuxt link that is going to the individual slug, which is the URL. We also have our article image, we have our article title, and our description, all within this vcard, which is a vuetify card component. And again, this corresponds to each of these individual cards that has the article title, the article image, the article description, etc. And then it's a link to the individual slug of that article. And again, on our individual pages, we can leverage the title, the description, the image, but the important part here is on line 8. So there's a Nuxt content component that you want to use to render the actual document. So this is what's going to show everything else that's after that YAML front matter block. All the markdown, everything, all the content of your post is going to be here in the article. And you want to pump this into the Nuxt content component in order for it to render properly. Awesome. Yeah. So again, if we take a look at our pages, and if you click on an individual blog post, we can see this slug here is dynamically generated. It's grabbing all of the details. And then this is going to be our Nuxt content block here. That's just showing everything that's coming from our markdown. And so if we open up our project directory, let me go ahead and pull VS Code over here into the screen. We can see here in our content directory, we have our articles. And if we look at the SQLized basics for beginner markdown, we have our front matter block with the title, description, image, alt, and tags. And then everything else here is just written in markdown, right? We have some images, we have some links, we have code snippets, and all of that gets rendered beautifully for me by Nuxt. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that we are using Netlify to build and deploy. So one of the things that we want to do is in our nuxt.config.js file again, we want to add target static. This is just to let Nuxt know that we are going to be building this site statically and to configure for that option. Within Netlify, so I have this set up in Netlify. We can connect the GitHub repository and then set the build command as npm run generate and the publish folder as dist. So the reason that we want to do this is, again, if we go back to our code, we can see that there's a dist folder that gets created with a build of our site. Every time that you run this npm run generate, it's going to run Nuxt generate, which is the command that is used to generate the site. This allows us to leverage a system where we're kind of using a Git-based CMS. So whenever we want to add new content to our site, all we need to do is add a new markdown file. So just create a pull request with that new markdown file, and Netlify will automatically run the npm run generate command. So build the new site. It'll publish it to the dist directory, and then it'll automatically deploy that dist folder that contains your site. So this is something that happens automatically and can be a really easy way to make quick updates to your site without having to deal with any kind of code at all, really just markdown. And just to demonstrate, again, I just showed this, but the generate corresponds to the Nuxt generate command. So if you do want to learn more about Nuxt in general, I use a number of different resources in order to create my site and also to develop this talk. So there's the Nuxt Content documentation, which is fantastic. I highly recommend taking a look at it. So essentially, it walks you through the installation, but then writing the content talks about how to essentially set up your content directory and make sure that you're writing your content correctly. And if you don't want to use Markdown, it'll demonstrate more if you wanted to use a different type of data file like JSON. With Gatsby previously for my old site, I had used Gatsby and I used JSON in order to manage my talks, my projects, my blog posts. So that's a different option that you could leverage as well. And it also has a lot more of the methods that are available on the content API. So I have a pretty straightforward, simple site, so I didn't have to leverage too many options. But this, it's actually a very, very comprehensive querying API. So if you wanted to only return certain elements of that option, or if you only wanted to query for blog posts that match a certain tag. So for example, all of my Markdown files do have tags currently, but I'm not leveraging that yet. If I wanted to, I could query and only return the ones that match a certain tag, and then you could filter by tag, for example. So it's very, very similar to, again, if you've used any of the plugins with Gatsby in order to query the content that you have, it works very similar to that. So definitely would recommend taking a look at some of the different options. So this where query is a really great one. So you can, it works just like MongoDB if you've ever used kind of a NoSQL syntax. So you can just kind of pass through where the title, so if you had search functionality, you can have that built in. Additionally, another resource I recommend is the Nuxt blog actually has created a blog with Nuxt Content, and this is the tutorial that I used initially. So a lot of great information here, including additional functionality like creating author pages. So if you had multiple contributors, or automatically creating the table of contents is something else that you could do. So there's a lot of different functionality beyond what we've just demonstrated here. Again, there's also the Nuxt.js documentation, and I highly recommend checking out vuetify if you like component libraries. I have a very long history with Bootstrap, and so this vuetify really works well with my experience, and I just would recommend checking that out if you are interested. So yeah, so those are some of the resources that I leveraged, and again, I'm sharing these slides and also the repository. Everything is open source. Definitely still open to any kind of suggestions or ideas or questions that you may have about Nuxt in general. All right, yeah, so thank you very much for your attention and for your interest today. I do want to leave some time to answer any questions that people may have. It doesn't have to be specifically related to Nuxt or Vue. I am happy to answer questions also related to, if you have any questions on software testing, I do work at Cypress, so I'm happy to answer questions there, or also questions about like graduating from a boot camp and getting into tech. So. Okay, so let me just take a look and see. So there's a question about it's like with React, and so I'm not sure specifically what that part was referring to, but I will say that coming from using Gatsby and React, which is what I used previously in order to build a blog site, I do have to say, like, I think I'm more partial to Vue in general, which is maybe why I like Nuxt a little bit better. But I did really enjoy the module aspect of it. I found that it was very simple and easy to use. The configuration was very easy to understand, and I enjoyed that a lot. Vue, I would say, as far as how it works with the dynamic creation and everything, probably is pretty aligned with React if you've come from that background. But happy to answer any specific questions on differences there. Awesome. Great. Okay, excellent. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So I would say I don't know if there's a Q&A functionality, Sarah, on Hopin. I don't believe that there is.
It should just be in the chat.
Awesome. Great. Great. Well, let me take a look here. One of the other things that oh yes, this is actually something that I realized that I wanted to mention. When working with your configuration file, something that I ran into is setting the meta tag. So in order to make the site responsive, like vuetify handles that automatically. But during the build process, we need to make sure that there is essentially a viewport tag that's added to the HTML. So if we take a look at our repository in the nuxt.config, is probably a little bit easier way to see this. We can see the content here that we needed to essentially add this metadata, but initially that didn't work for me. So what I did was in my actual pages and in my index.view, this head function, so essentially export default in our script tag. Head is how you can add any type of meta tags to the head object in your HTML. So here's where we're setting a meta tag with the name viewport, and we're essentially setting the width device and the initial scale. This is what allows the application to recognize that it's a mobile device and then respond accordingly and render correctly. So there's a lot of different, that's something that comes with Nuxt specifically. So if you ever do need to add any kind of meta tags, that's how you would leverage that, is with that head function in your script tag. Okay, awesome. So we have about 10 minutes left for questions. I'm happy to cover any questions that anybody has, or dive into any other topics. Or I could, I know that we have a lot of great sessions today. We have networking, we have the expo, and you can check out and get your own Women Who Code t-shirt. I get as many as I can whenever I can. I'm a huge swag nerd. So definitely make sure that you take advantage of all of that. And I do also want to just thank the organizers and all of our moderators and volunteers who have put in tons of work to make this possible. I love that this is a global event that fits all time zones, but that definitely takes a lot of extra work to make sure that we have people available 24 hours. So just a lot of love and kudos to the organizers for putting this on and getting this together so that we can all learn together and build our community. So thank you very much, Sierra, especially for all your help.